It is June 1994. Inside a quiet hotel room, the Colombian national football team is trying to relax before the biggest match of their lives. But suddenly, the television broadcast cuts to black. A typed message appears on the screen. If a certain player steps onto the field tomorrow, the team and their families will not survive the week. This is not a prank from the network. It is a rather direct warning from the cartels. So what happens when a national sports team receives a death threat right before the biggest game of their lives? And how does one mistake cause a player to lose his life? For decades, the FIFA World Cup has been the most watched sporting event on the planet, defining nations and generating billions of dollars. And for Colombia, being in this tournament is a massive deal because just 1 year earlier, they crushed Argentina by 5-0. They are the Golden Team, the heavy favorites to win the entire World Cup. Now, it is June 22nd, 1994. Colombia is about to face the United States at the Rose Bowl Stadium, packed with 90,000 fans, while millions are watching on the television. For Colombia, this is a very big deal. This is their second match of the World Cup. Their opening game against Romania ended in a disappointing 3-1 defeat, so losing tonight means their World Cup dream is over. The entire country is watching, but it's not just the average football fans watching the game. In the 1990s, the cartels and the mafias held major control over Colombia. Their influence is into everything, including the sport. These cartels are spending millions of dollars on football through illegal betting and other criminal activities. To understand what environment the Colombian team is playing in, the drug lord himself, Pablo Escobar, actually owns their local club, Atlético Nacional. He uses the club to clean his money, but also the fact that Pablo himself was a really big fan of football. But because he is entirely in charge, the criminal underworld still has some sense of order. Everyone follows a set of rules. But then, 6 months before the World Cup, Pablo is taken out by the Colombian security forces. The public assumes the violence will finally stop. Instead, the exact opposite happens. Rival groups immediately start competing for control created after Pablo's absence. There is no code of conduct among them anymore. They are completely unpredictable and violent, which is why this is the absolute worst time to cost these people millions of dollars. However, Colombia losing the first match of the World Cup has already caused a huge loss to these people, and they can't afford to lose another match. Therefore, these mafias keep a close eye on everything during the match, including who is being sent out to play in the field. And for most athletes, a bad game usually means angry fans and bad press. But for 27-year-old Andrés Escobar, a single mistake on the field is about to cost him everything. Coming back to the match, Andrés is playing the center back position as the primary defender of the national Colombian team. Andrés is calm, humble, and deeply respected by everyone. He is nicknamed the gentleman of football. And 35 minutes into the match, an American midfielder sends the ball, crossing into the penalty area. Andrés stretches out to block it, but in the attempt of doing so, the ball deflects off his foot and rolls directly into his own net, causing an own goal.
As Sparks now, with Caligiuri overlapping on the far side, sends it inside, it's an own goal! The USA gets the score. Escobar on the own goal, and the United States leads Colombia.
The entire country is stunned. He scores against his own team. Colombia ends up losing the match by 2-1 and is eliminated from the World Cup. Everyone is mad, including the cartels, who just lost millions of dollars again and are blaming Andrés for the loss. Andrés and his teammates start to receive threatening messages from all over their country. The team decides to stay in the United States until things cool down back in Colombia. However, Andrés decides to head back to Colombia as soon as his team is eliminated from the World Cup. His family is worried about his well-being, and even his coach asked him to stay inside his hotel. But why would Andrés go back, knowing it was unsafe? Like I mentioned earlier, Andrés is a genuinely positive guy. He doesn't want to hide or live in fear. Before he even leaves the United States, he writes a public column in a Colombian newspaper. It's not just an apology for the mistake, it's a message of hope for his fans. We'll see each other again soon because life does not end here. And 10 days after the game, on the evening of July 1st, 1994, Andrés is in Colombia with his friends heading to a bar. Shortly afterwards, they arrive at a nightclub. His friends decide to split up, and at approximately 3 a.m., Andrés is alone in the parking lot of the nightclub, sitting in his car when three men approach him. It is the Gallan brothers, Santiago and Pedro Gallan, prominent cartel figures and former associates of Pablo Escobar, along with their personal bodyguard. It is alleged that the Gallan brothers had bet heavily on the match, and losing millions of dollars made them furious. An argument begins between all of them. Then suddenly, the bodyguard draws out a firearm, aiming 6 shots towards Andrés. According to witnesses, he started shouting "goal" after every shot. The group then drives away in a Toyota pickup truck, leaving Andrés in the parking lot. He is then rushed to the hospital, but just 45 minutes later, he passes away. Just like that, the 27-year-old athlete is gone without ever getting a second chance to play for his country. But the very next day, the bodyguard is arrested and he confesses to the crime. And in June 1995, he is found guilty and is given a 43-year sentence. However, despite this sentence, he only ends up serving 11 years before being released. But on the other hand, the Gallan brothers never received any sort of punishment. It was clear that the bodyguard was simply following orders from the Gallan brothers, but the law enforcement simply lacked the evidence to convict them. There are also allegations that the Gallan brothers had bribed the prosecutor's office to direct the investigation towards their bodyguard alone. It is also worth noting that over 120,000 people showed up on the streets of Medellin for Andrés' funeral, including the president of Colombia himself. As tragic as Andrés' story is, it is nothing compared to the World Cup qualifier match between Honduras and El Salvador, which escalates to the point of them declaring war on each other, the 100-hour war. El Salvador and Honduras are neighboring countries in Central America, and they share a deep, intense obsession with football. But they also share a massive border crisis. Honduras is about 5 times larger than El Salvador, but despite the massive size difference, it had a population of only around 2.6 million people at the time, while El Salvador is home to about 3.7 million people, most of whom are farmers. Since the people of El Salvador are running out of farmland, thousands of Salvadorans illegally crossed the border into Honduras looking for space to work. By the late 1960s, Salvadorans made up almost 20% of the entire population of Honduras. But over time, things begin to change. Honduras' economy is struggling. A large portion of the country's land is owned by wealthy landowners and large corporations. These landowners pressure the president of Honduras to confiscate the land from the Salvadoran settlers and hand it over to Honduran citizens. Almost overnight, Salvadoran families who have lived there for generations are thrown out of their own homes. This naturally fuels violence and hatred throughout the country. To make matters worse, the Honduran government in 1969 decided not to renew their 1967 bilateral treaty on immigration, leading to the deportation of even more Salvadorans. The relations between the two countries are becoming unstable, and right in the middle of this massive political crisis, the two countries are scheduled to play each other for the final spot in the 1970 FIFA World Cup. 3 qualifier matches will be deciding who gets to have a spot in the tournament. The first match takes place in the Honduras capital on June 8, 1969. The night before the game, Honduran fans gather outside the Salvadoran team's hotel. They throw rocks, set off firecrackers, making so much noise all night so the players are unable to sleep. The exhausted Salvadoran team loses the match 1-0. After the match, a young Salvadoran fan, Amelia Bolaños, devastated by the defeat, passes away. But instead of treating it as a tragedy, the Salvadoran government glorifies the incident, declaring her a national hero. 1 week later, the second game takes place in El Salvador's capital. This time, the tables are turned. Salvadoran fans gather outside the Honduran team's hotel throughout the night, throwing debris and smashing windows. This time, the exhausted Honduran team loses 3-0, but the game itself is a total nightmare. Salvadoran organizers refuse to raise the Honduran flag, raising up a dirty rag instead. There are fights breaking out in the stands, and the Honduran team has to flee the stadium in a bulletproof bus just to survive. Their coach literally tells the press that they are lucky they lost because if they had won, they probably wouldn't have made it out of there alive. This defeat enrages people back in Honduras, and they take out their frustration on Salvadoran migrants residing in Honduras. And around 1,400 Salvadorans are expelled from Honduras every single day. Relations between the two countries are hanging by a thread now, and it all comes down to the final tiebreaker match in Mexico City on June 26th. The match is brutal, but El Salvador manages to win 3-2, officially knocking Honduras out of the World Cup, and that is the breaking point of Honduras's people. The violence against Salvadoran migrants continues to escalate. In response, El Salvador severs all diplomatic ties, and on July 14th, they invade Honduras, launching aerial strikes on them while their troops are rapidly pushing across the border. But Honduras retaliates the same day. Its air force strikes down Salvadoran airports and oil storage facilities. Despite running low on fuel, Salvadoran forces continue advancing toward the Honduran capital. Because Honduras has a smaller military, they quickly appeal to the Organization of American States for help, known as OAS. The OAS steps in and threatens El Salvador with massive economic sanctions unless they pull their troops back. Facing immense international pressure, El Salvador has no choice. On July 18th, both countries agree to a ceasefire. The entire conflict lasts only 100 hours, which is why it is also known as the 100-hour war. But in those 100 hours, thousands of people suffered devastating casualties, and tens of thousands were left completely homeless. Ironically, El Salvador goes on to play in the 1970 World Cup, but loses every single match and ends up being eliminated by the very first round.